These run periodically, but we actually extended this to be a little bit larger. We invited all of our businesses as well because we wanted to make sure that each and every one of you had an opportunity to hear what we needed to share as far as the utility update financially. Before we do, there's a handful of things we wanted to make sure you were aware of. We recently created our first e-newsletter. That goes to every businesses. Hopefully each of you have received that. What we've done is we've taken the contact information from our customer information system. So generally that would go to whoever receives the bill. That's, finance, accounts payable. So if you want to receive that, certainly let us know and we will add that to you. I think it makes a lot of sense for the businesses from an operational standpoint. This is a bi-monthly newsletter that will go out. It informs you of a handful of things in this last issue. There was the fact that we just introduced a new look and feel to our bill, as well as the fact that now customers can pay online. Still obviously have option with the ACH and a handful of things that are on there. I would say industry standards for a newsletter, open rate about anywhere between 27% to 30% open is very good. Here in Vernon, thankfully, the businesses very much are attuned to wanting to know what's happening. We had more than a 50% open rate. So kudos to all of you. One of the things that was also highlighted in the newsletter was the integrated resource plan. So you see a couple folks outside from the power resource team. And what they do is every 5 years, they put together the integrated resource plan, they revisit it. It helps them determine how interested the city, the businesses want to go green. Then they have to then take that into consideration with balancing reliability as well with rates. So we'd love for each of you to take the opportunity to fill the survey out, about 12 questions. And Sylvie's here. She's going to hand out a flyer. On that is a QR code. During this conversation, hopefully you take a few minutes, or if you could do it now, that would be great. Use your smartphone. That will ultimately dictate how much green resources the city brings into its area to serve our utility for our power. And we are already well aware of or making the state mandate of 60% renewable by 2040. This is whether or not you want us to exceed that amount. Okay. And then, of course, why I think the majority of you are here today is to hear where we are as far as financially with the utility and what that means for your budget forecast. But before we do that, I want to make sure that Carlos, our city administrator, has an opportunity to give you an overview of the city's finance.
Thank you. Good morning. So I wanted to give you a quick update of what's going on with the city and some of a financial update. And thank you for taking the time today to come out and be a part of this. We do try to do a lot of outreach to our customer base. And it's difficult sometimes to reach everybody and get people in a room and explain what's going on for transparency. But I just want to let you know that, number one, we want to be transparent. We are transparent, and it's important for you to understand that our government is here to work for you, period. We're here to provide service to the public, to the businesses, and keep them competitive. As you're aware, there's this thing called inflation that's been affecting everybody, and it's been affecting the city as well. So I want to give you kind of a broad overview of some of the challenges that we're facing here at the city and some of the impacts that we've seen over the last couple of months. We've seen a rise in inflation and a rise of cost of goods. That has translated into a rise in our expenditures, both on the general fund side and on enterprise. And enterprise is basically our utilities, which is fiber optic, natural gas, water, and electricity. Those rises in today's dollars is exponentially much higher than we saw 4 or 5 years ago. The general fund is also seeing some challenges as well. the general fund is seeing challenges and an increased cost in labor, increased cost in pension, increased cost in contracts and cost of service. And then it's seen a diminished drop in revenues on sales tax. Now, the city gets a certain percentage of everything that's sold in the city. So if you have a vendor that is basically selling a good and taxes that, and it comes into Vernon with the zip code 90058, and that is assigned to Vernon, we get a certain percentage of that tax that comes back as revenue, which I'll show up on the screen in a couple of seconds of revenues that come into the general fund. We are here to provide service at no, we're not here for profit. In other words, our whole mission is to provide a competitive advantage for our customer, period. We're not here to make money. We're not here to lose money. We're here to pass those costs on and give you excellent service. But I need everybody to really look at this pie chart and understand where our monies come from. Property taxes, would you be shocked if I told you all the property taxes that are collected in the city of Vernon, the millions of dollars, what the city of Vernon receives in property tax is $5.4 million a year. Does that seem reasonable? No. So for every dollar that a business owner or a landowner spends on property tax, we only get 7 cents. The rest of that goes to LA County. We don't see that. So if you look at the different ways that we're able to collect money, okay, we have the safety parcel tax, which is passed by the voters, which is about 2.3 million. That tax is only going to be in place for about 5 years. And the reason we did that is because we recognize that we are going to see some load increases in the next couple of years. And we're going to revisit how the UUT is structured by the year 2028. So we wanted to bridge that gap between now and 2028. So if you look at license and permits, in order to do work in City of Vernon, you get your permits, licenses. You pay that's what we receive in permits, 2.3 million. State and federal grants, 3.7 million. Overhead allocation that comes from the utility, 3.9 million. Other revenues could be interest, could be other offsets that we receive off of revenues, 4.9 million. An in lieu tax, that's basically a tax that's on the utility that the utility pays back to the general fund, is 5.4 million a year. Property tax, 5.4, and then business license. When you do business in the city of Vernon, you got to pull a permit. It's 5.5 million that we receive. So not a whole lot of money comes from those buckets. The majority of our money coming into the city's general fund is on the right-hand side, which is the user utility tax, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a second. We have a warehouse parcel tax that's taxed on the warehouse square footage of each business, which is about $13 million. And we have a sales tax that we collect that we talked about earlier. You know, when goods are sold, that sales comes back to the city and we get that tax in the amount of $16.3 million. So we don't have a lot of sources of revenue for the city. That is what it is. Okay. The state of California doesn't really give us money. We don't get subsidized by the federal government. We don't get subsidized by the state of California. Our per capita. So when you look at how many residents the city of Vernon has, it's less than 300. When special measures are passed or there's special taxes that are passed, they're based on per capita, because the thinking behind it is the more people in a population or in a city, there is going to be more usage, and therefore they should get more of the pot. So when we go look at like a Measure M, which is a special tax for transportation that was passed a couple of years ago in the state of California, the state of California gives the city of Los Angeles $22 to $24 million a year for transportation to fix their streets. The city of Vernon received a check for $1,100. Thank you very much. So those are the challenges that we have to face here in the city. On top of that, we want to provide the highest quality service that we can to the business community. Okay. So understanding this pie chart is important when we go into what we're going to talk about on the city's finance side. We're seeing an increase in inflation. We're seeing an increase in labor costs. We're seeing an increase in overall general services. And we're seeing a decrease in sales tax revenue, which was one of our major contributors. So why are we seeing a decrease in sales tax revenue? Well, during COVID, the city of Vernon saw an uptick in sales tax. A lot of people went home. A lot of people were shopping online. A lot of retail we have in Vernon. We have garment industry here in Vernon. Those companies flourished during COVID. Okay. The user utility tax is diminishing. Why? Why is the user utility tax diminishing? Well, unfortunately, we've had a couple of businesses that have been affected in Vernon. One of them is Farmer John. They picked up and basically left the state of California. That overall impact to the city was close to $14 million. Okay. That's money that's not coming into the city anymore. Baker Commodities obviously had to shut down for a temporary period of time. They're one of our top 25 customers. That affected the overall UUT. Okay. We're hopeful that Baker can come back up soon. And I know that they're working on the permits, and I think they're pretty much, they have half their operation back. And so we're really happy about that. And then lastly, we know that we're going to be losing another top 25 customer, which is Ray Rig Pacific. They've basically picked up their shop and they said, we'll be out of here in February 2024. Ray Rig is a top 25 customer, is also one of our top 5 sales tax contributors. They make trash cans. You know, the blue trash cans that you take out to your trash, you know, at home, and you have the green ones and all that. So they're picking up shop. They said, we can't do business anymore in California. It's just too expensive. And we're going to go to the state of Nevada and we're going to open up shop over there. My job here is to provide that competitive advantage for you. Number one. Number two is to provide you the best quality service. But number three, understand that there's a fine line. We can't continue to tax and bill our customers and expect them to stay here in Vernon. We can't. We're not your typical government here. Okay. We're not your typical city. We're not. And staff here understands that. We have a tremendous staff here that works in the city, and we're here to serve you. But there's challenges. There's challenges over the next couple of years that are going to be affecting us. So I've talked about the loss of businesses. We have that banner that sits in this council chamber that we keep up there to remind ourselves of what our goal is by the year 2030. The goal is to have the lowest rates in California. And I think, and I know that right now we've increased our competitive advantage with other utilities. And you'll see a slide later on in Richard Corby's presentation of that margin that you see growing. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if businesses can't manage their cash flow. It doesn't matter if businesses can't be competitive in Vernon. None of that matters, because businesses will leave. And we recognize that. Can we put the slide up for the enterprise fund? No, he's gonna do it. Okay. So, no, back. So, nope. 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 Enterprise expenditures. It's a pie graph. There you go. So how does the enterprise side get their funding? Okay. How does the utility get most of the revenues? You have the four revenue sources there. You can see the majority of the money comes in from electric. So our electric customers is about $244 million of revenue for the city. And then you have gas, which is about 22, water is about 11 million, and fiber, which is less than 5%. So Farmer John was our top water consumer here in Vernon, and they're gone. So we're losing a tremendous amount of money on the water side from Farmer John. And also we're a huge consumer of natural gas and also electric. So those things are impacting our utility and the overall health of the utility. Can we go to enterprise expenditures? Next slide. Is there a pie graph? There is, right? There you go. So those are the operating expenditures of the utility, and you can see cost of sales is the majority of the operating expenses, and we have debt. The debt that we have, which is the orange pie chart right there. Many businesses right now will criticize me for amortizing our debt over the 7-year period. I understand that that's not a favorable thing to do. I understand we could have elongated that debt over a 30-year period and smoothed out that bond debt payment, but I recognized that doing so would basically put an asset that has a life expectancy of 2035. And if I elongate that over a 30-year period, the city would be paying on that debt for years to come with no value from the asset. So we decided in the best interest of the business community right now, because that's what we looked at. What's best, not for the city, but for our business community. Let's have this amortized over a 7-year period. We'll pay off our debt, and we can lower and have the lowest rates of electricity here in California by the year 2030. But it doesn't matter if we can't get to 2030. It doesn't matter if businesses close shop now because they can't afford to be here. None of that matters if we can't keep you competitive now. So my message to you is that we will do everything that we can. We hear you. We heard you when the ECA charges were in place in the month of December, the month of January, and the month of February. We hear how upset you were with the amount of money that was billed to customers during that time. And I'm here to tell you that I will do everything in my power to ensure that that never happens again, that we never have months like that again. Some of those things, which we'll talk about later on, were out of our control, and the city has subsidized a lot of those costs. But we are going to move forward in a direction to ensure that we protect our businesses, that we don't expose our businesses to that type of margin ever again. Because if you diminish cash flow to a business on any given month, it cripples that business. It cripples them. So I want to hear from the business community. I want to hear ideas. I have my own ideas on what we can do, but we want to ensure that we can smooth that out. Our budget assumption this year, we're going to operate with a deficit. And what that means is our expenditures versus revenues are exceeded by about 14 million. So we are operating at a $14 million deficit. In other words, we will not be able to meet all our expenditures with the revenue that we receive because of the factors that I talked about. Customers leaving, loss of UUT, loss of sales tax, inflation, and labor cost. So where does the money come from? Well, the city has built up reserves. The city has been able to build up reserves for things like this. I can tell you that when I took over as city administrator in 2015, our cash reserves were at an all-time low. I'm not here to boast and say that we are just going to build reserves. That's not what we're trying to do. But you build reserves in order to be able to smooth out things that are happening right now. So when I talk about a 5% rate increase for the utility, we're already subsidizing a $14 million deficit, which we'll see this coming year. Without that 5%, that number grows, by another $6 to $8 million. The last thing I want to say is that the city of Vernon in 2010 was doom and gloom. We had $1 billion of debt service. $1 billion of debt service. By the year 2028, the city will have less than $8 million of debt. So we are looking good for the future, but we got to get there without losing customers. So we are committed to do outreach. We're committed to sit down with our top 25 customers. Now, why do I say our top 25 customers? I'll talk to every single customer if I could, all right? Obviously, we have 1,800 customers, but the majority of our customers here in Vernon, the revenue comes from our top 25 customers. In other words, after your top 25, that revenue distribution really, really drops down. So some will argue, like Crown Poly did yesterday, about, well, it's not fair that the majority of the burden is on our top 25 customers. Okay. And that is based on usage. It's based on electricity usage. So we need to look at how we do things and see what we can do in the future to try to mitigate those bumps in the road so that we don't have, again, customers leaving Vernon, because it's important for us to maintain that advantage. So I'll turn it over to Richard unless you have any questions for me, and I'll be available after Richard's presentation, and I'll answer any questions then. So if you don't have any questions right now, then I'll just turn it over, and then we'll proceed, and then I can answer questions at the end. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Richard Corby. I'm the manager of planning and analysis for the utility. And it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'll walk through the planning process for 23-24. I've been here with the city of Vernon for less than a year, but I do want to give you a little bit of my background. I've worked in public power and investor-owned utilities for over 30 years. So I've done financial planning and analysis, rates, been involved in public hearings, talking about rates and challenges for our customers. So can we go to the first slide? So during this process, what we wanted to do was to maintain two things: our mission to our customers, providing reliable service and competitive rates. The second goal internally was to have a balanced budget. The deficit that Carlos talked about when we first started was over $30 million. And we proceeded to go through a number of the issues that faced the utility and what we call a transition period between now and the next several years. So as Carlos mentioned, the budget assumes minimal load growth. We have some EV load growth in there, but nothing significant. We also are faced with higher costs that Carlos talked about. Also, in our cost, our higher construction cost. So we have a factor of, for example, on the water fund, with higher construction cost, the water fund is actually absorbing another $700,000 in capital to finish projects. Where normally that would be bond funded. Our bond money has been used. So now in 23-24 to finish those projects, that's incorporated in the water fund budget. And then Carlos talked about the loss of customers and what that meant for the utility. So we started from a ground up on the revenue side. Typically what you see is when you're doing rates, nobody talks about loss of customers. We talk about cost, we talk about capital, but here we had to talk about what it means to revenue. So we had to do a bottom-up approach to make sure that what our revenue looked like going forward, not only what we did for the budget for 22-23, but also with Farmer John leaving, what it meant for the rest of 23-24. So that we put together a forecast for 22-23 and then 23-24. So it's really almost a 16-month impact on just on revenue. And included on the water fund, I think you can't see it there, but we also lost some water customers that impacted the water fund. So we have across all our funds significant impact on revenue for water, gas, and electric. And then throughout the budget process, we wanted to maintain our infrastructure investment, and we're a capital intensive business, and we wanted to make sure we kept our reliability. So here's the more detailed look at our customers. So when you look at this slide, you'll see on average, we have our customers been here about 35 years. This also represents almost half our revenue. So just roughly about 90 million in revenue for those top customers out of about 180 million for electric sales. Why is this slide important? Back in February, we met with Moody's. Everybody looks at this slide. Part of our credit profile is how concentrated is our revenue. And they look at this and they want to know about our customers. Yesterday, we had a meeting with Standard & Poor's, the same discussion about our customers. We're concentrated in our customer base. So we're in a transition period now between our customers and a new type of customer coming in green commerce going forward. And that's all part of short-term planning and long-term planning. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Can we go to the next slide? So as Carlos mentioned, we're about 14 million projected loss for next year. The original budget, to put these numbers in perspective, in 22-23, that number budgeted was over 20 million. My forecast for 22-23 is about half of that, about 9 million from the original budget, and then slightly above in 23-24 of about the 14 million. So I started out by saying we were roughly 30 million, and we're like any other business. We go through all our capital, all our expenses, how we operate. We have to treat this as a business. So during the course of about a month or so, we went through all the revenue, we went through all the expenses and capital, and we were able to defer, I didn't say cut, defer our some capital by approximately $10 million. Now, what does that mean for the long term? Well, so part of this process, and actually it was requested by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's, they wanted to know what our 5-year capital plan was. So here are some projects that we deferred, but that capital plan represents slightly above $80 million for the next 5 years. So the deferral from 23-24 has been built in to 24-25 and future years. So we only deferred 1 year, but that's cash. That basically means that we don't go to the market, the debt market, and issue debt. This is all PAYCO capital, and we have to have a plan to get there. So the capital needs don't change. And one thing I will point out about the 80 million, it really just means for the plant itself is normal capital. So if there's things that need to be done to the plant, that's a separate discussion. This is just normal maintaining reliable service for our infrastructure. So how do we close the deficit? So as Carlos mentioned, and one thing you'll hear from me, you're going to hear the numbers, and I'm going to tell you straight. So the numbers I'm going to give you are from the work that we did, and I believe in transparency in what we're doing. So the expense stabilization fund, we're at this time proposing we would take about $7.9 million from the fund. Now, this was another question that Moody's asked us, what do you project that fund to be in June of 23? So my projection was about slightly above 40 million. So as we do the budget, the initial transfer would be about, as I said, 7.9, and then normal operating cash fund balance of 6 million. But we do have a plan about driving this to zero. And we committed to Carlos that as a team, we're going to monitor and review just like you do it. Every month end, we'll have a monthly financial review, and we'll take a hard look at where we're spending, and what will be done is then a rolling forecast for the rest of the years. So we need to get in a mode of looking ahead, looking forward. And that's what this plan and this budget process has done. So, for example, when you see that deficit, well, usually in the utility business, you don't see expenses and capital being spent the first quarter meaning starting July. So usually after 3 months, you start to see capital and the hiring take place. So we'll have to look at that and forecast it out. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Margie, this is a transition period we're talking about, but the positive thing is our customers, our new customers coming on board over the next several years.
Afternoon or good mornings. You know, I realized when I first started talking that I also didn't introduce myself.
Yeah.
So my name is Margie Otto, and I'm the Assistant General Manager for the utility. Some of your faces are new to me. Some of them are not. I've been with the utility for almost 2 years now. I'm not new to the publicly owned utility. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years, specifically working with Anaheim Public Utilities and Pasadena Water and Power. So as Richard shared, you know, really these next 2 years are very vital as we see them as transition. We're fortunate in the sense that of the 1,800 businesses that we have in Vernon, we see a whole new sort of sector coming in, and we call that sort of the green commerce. So this slide here really depicts what these projects would mean at full build out. So they, you know, we recognize, and we really took much more of a conservative approach. That 150 megawatts of load is when these projects come online, you know, when they actually start 10 years out. So, and the green hydrogen, the EV charging depots, that sort of what the many months of conversation between Public Works and the utility, even legal, and finance to try and attract these businesses to come to Vernon. This next slide is a little bit more of an accurate representation of what we see in the next year or two when it actually comes to load growth. So the data centers, that's the one there on Santa Fe. You know, at its first phase, we anticipate 3 to 9 megawatts. We've got another data center that we've been working in conversations with. The remainder of the projects there listed, they're in heavy discussions of getting started or entering into, you know, a lease or a purchase agreement. But whether it's these projects or, you know, 6 or 7 that we didn't list here, again, we took a very conservative approach of what we actually see in terms of future load growth and what that might mean. So in total, that's about 24 megawatts. When you look at what our lost load was, that's about 12. So this would double that. So there is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of what we see as far as new development, but it's how do we close that gap in the meantime to ensure that we continue to provide the reliable power that we need and to close that deficit. So as Carlos mentioned very early on, right, our goal is to make sure that you have that competitive edge and that you have that reliability. This is a capture of the banner that you see here on the wall. And we also have to balance that with, as Richard has been speaking to, is making sure that we preserve our stabilization fund and that we do the necessary cuts and make the decisions to make some rate adjustments to get us over that hump. Richard and I will both speak to this, but you know, there's a lot of acronyms here. The SAFE, the CATIE, the SADI, that's actually, you know, in short, something that we get assessed by as a utility of how many outages do we have in a year, how long is the duration, and how quickly is the utility able to restore. So we're very proud of the fact that we are an RP3 recipient for the last 3 consecutive times. They were awarded them in 3-year periods. So when you look at it nationally, we're compared against all the publicly owned utilities. There's about 2,000 nationwide, only about 130 get the RP3 at the diamond leveled. And that's what Vernon has so proudly been able to receive and that you as customers benefit from. Todd can actually speak to the average duration of our outages.
Sure. So if you look at safety, for, you know, half of our would have so 80 so their response time is slower slower than central storage.
Okay, I think he's wrapping up on that point.
And then in terms of safety, that's our average rate for now. For all IOUs and POUs, you see that the average duration there of an outage when a customer has an outage is 98 minutes. Where in the city of Vernon, our average duration of an outage is only 38 minutes. We typically have about 36 outages a year. Half of those, 18 of those are only 10 seconds. So really we're talking about 18 to 20 outages a year that are more than 10 seconds.
And I think the Vernon businesses know that, you know, you can't afford to be even out for a momentary of seconds. You know, we've heard from our customers and we know how important reliability is. If there's, you know, 10-second interruption, they can lose the entire distribution of their load. So that's a huge loss to your bottom line. We recognize that. Other utilities know it too, although their averages are much longer and their frequencies are much higher. Just as an example, in Anaheim, when there's a 1-second interruption, that means a 2-hour interruption to Disneyland, right? Because that little bump in the system means that they have to reset all of their rides and they have to retest them. And so that's an impact of 2 hours. And you know how many people come in and out of Disneyland on an average. Similarly, the businesses here in Vernon may not have that many visitors coming in and out, but the impact to the bottom line is equally as high.
So moving forward about our plan for 23 and 24. So in the 23-24 budget, we have a proposed 5% rate increase effective July 1st. We are currently completing cost of service study. We anticipate that that will be presented to council in early June. As part of that process, we will be doing a long-term financial plan. The other two funds, water, we plan on issuing a RFP during the summer to update our cost of service study, because the cost of service study was done several years ago, but during the budget process, we, again, as I said earlier, we have a loss of customers, we have higher cost, and they also have capital requirements going forward. So we would issue an RFP and then start that process during the fall of 23 for the cost of service study. Natural gas, a city council approved rate increases for the natural gas fund, but here's another example on the gas fund. Cost of service study was completed. And right after that study was completed, Farmer John gave notice that they were leaving Vernon. So currently we have no plans to update that cost of service study, but the focus will be on electric and water. You want to talk about the comparison?
Yeah. So, ultimately, when we talk about a 5% rate adjustment, the natural question is, well, then what does that mean if I were to be in another jurisdiction and served by another utility? So this slide here doesn't represent all the utilities in California, but the majority of what is either nearby or competitive. As you can see here, this is us taking a look at our largest, or the majority of our customers sit in our largest customer class, which is our TOUVT. So what we did was we benchmarked it to what the other utilities are. As you can see, Vernon sits on the lowest side. SMUD's a little bit different, right? SMUD's jurisdiction is very similar to Edison. It's very large. And so where we have 4 customer classes, they have something like 11. And generally what they do is they take a look at all of their customers and they see where the largest class sits. In their case, it's residential, right? And so then they take a look at ways to spread that cost of operating their utility onto their largest customer class. So they're residential. And then what they do is they recognize for every customer, about a 1 megawatt load is about 10,000 residents. It's beneficial to have a very large customer. So they ensure that the way to attract is to have a very competitive rate for their largest customers. Now, this slide only reflects what the current rate is. We are also doing, as part of our cost of service study, a comparison of where the utilities are going to be in the next year, 2, 3. And so I'm sure many of you, as depending on where you live, probably are served by Edison. So there was a recent proposal by the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities. So that's Edison, that's PG&E, and that's SDG&E. When they look at their rates, part of how they want to make sure that they can get not only cost recovery, but actually financial gain, is they look at different ways to charge the customer. So what they've proposed, and if they pass, I think it's April of 2024, they're going to impose a income charge, right? So based on what your income is, they're going to set a flat fee. So in addition to whatever your consumption uses is for your electric, you're also going to get a fixed charge. And Richard can speak to his experience with working with IOUs as it relates to that. But, you know, different from a publicly owned utility, and I'm sure many of you know this, is that we can only charge customers the cost for us to provide what it costs for us to run the utility. There is no, business model in place for us to make money. Whatever it costs us for gas, whatever it costs us for electricity, whatever it costs us for the manpower and the infrastructure is the actual true cost is the only thing that we can set into our rates. So, and then even as part of this preliminary sort of cost of service study, we even looked into Burbank. So Burbank has plans to do a 9% electric increase for 2 years. So that's 9 plus the 9. And then on the water side, it's an additional 8% increase for a 2-year period. So utilities across the board are not only increasing their rates, but there are probably going to be set a lot higher. We as a utility are really, cognizant of what that means to your bottom line. So we are trying to do our part to try and minimize that. Richard could probably speak to truthfully, if it were up to him, he'd probably set that at, what was your initial proposal to us was like 10%, because that's really what the numbers speak to. But we understand what that means to your bottom line. And so our conversations with Carlos, with our general manager, with Todd, we understand what the palate, the appetite, or the resistance would create.
Thanks, Margie. Let me just talk to a little bit about that process, since 10% was mentioned. On the IOU side, it may not make you feel any better, but what IOUs do are two things. One, they work with local legislative representatives, and they try to get laws passed that create surcharges, infrastructure surcharges. So where I just mentioned the 5-year plan on capital of 80 million, IOUs, at least in my experience, try to pass that on much faster than a normal rate process, because the standard I've been involved in, every 3 years, there would be a rate proposal. Legislative wise, if you pass an annual surcharge, their costs are being recovered for capital. We're not doing that. So the initial revenue process that I went through is I looked at base rates. If we did nothing, what would that deficit look like? I think you can understand the challenges with that. And we did look at various, I looked at various combinations of rate changes because in the final analysis, what's important is that not only I understand from a customer perspective, I've been involved in customer public hearings on rate changes and proposals, but you have to balance between our customers, city council, and then the people that rate the utility. So all these factors are taken into consideration when we're looking at revenue and cost and then planning. So I just want to give you a little bit more perspective on what was involved in the process as we looked at this internally. So between starting with the city administrator and Todd and Margie and department heads within the utility, we went through every line item. And those were interesting discussions, but that's how we were able to go through this process today. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this is really where it all comes together for the utility. As we said, we're in a transition period for the next 2 years, but the things that are happening simultaneously, as I mentioned, the cost of service, But at the same time, the cost of service study is being done. We're going to be working on a 5-year financial plan over the next several months. This was a request that actually came from Standard & Poor's in our meetings, in their data requests. First, I think one of the second things they asked for was, what's your 5-year plan? Well, we're in the process of doing that. So that's important because it takes everything we're talking about. Now we're going to go out several years to see how we look. The next item, which I was charged early on when I got here, is putting together a financial reserve policy for the utility. The city has one, but the utility needs one as well. So the template, the things that we'll be discussing is, number one is rate stabilization fund. So in other words, when we have higher cost for energy or construction costs, the things we talked about, instead of passing all that on to the customer, we would be able to use this fund to mitigate the risk not only to the utility, but ultimately to you, our customer. I've been involved in that, and given where our cash position today, that's a several-year process, because I would see a minimum level we would need, and then what a recommended level would be, and with somewhere you're in the middle. But it does take time to get there. That's just, it's been my experience over the years about being involved in this process. And I was a CFO at Burbank Water and Power. I've been through in similar situation where customers upset about rates. We built this plan, and it works, and it just takes time to get there. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions on that. As I said about the cost of service study for water, but that again is a 5-year plan. So it's as we mentioned several times, a transition process, a planning process, and just I want to let you be aware of that. We take this seriously, and it's always part of our dialogue on a daily basis when we're having these discussions about where the utility is. It's a challenge, but we're all up for that challenge. I'll answer any questions about what I just talked about or anything from the prior slides, but thank you.
One of the slides you showed, project. What is?
So that's conversations that we've been having to bring in a new customer. They would be developing it here in Vernon, and then it would be shipped out to whoever they've identified as their clients.
So is it? Cost?
They're in negotiations. This is a year's worth of conversations and discussions and negotiations, and they're our expectation is for them to enter into a lease agreement this week. Yeah. So, and again, on that slide, when we talked about after the first data center one, there are a handful of other projects after that, and I'll go back to it just for reference. We really wanted to take a conservative approach. And so if it wasn't the green hydrogen or the EV charging depot 1 or the EV charging depot 2, there's 6 or 7 other projects that we didn't list because they were equally as far along. We just wanted to really kind of depict the fact that the load that we see in the next year or two is coming, and not only is it significant, it's double what we lost, from the handful of customers. Yes, Kathy.
With that in mind, have a night loss. Or you have a period of
2 years that you need to cover. Specifically on the ECA, from my perspective, the reserves are there for anomalies, and the ECA was a 3-month period of anomalies. Is there any thought to going back and retroactively using the reserves to cover that 3-month anomaly?
You want to speak to that? So Carlos is going to speak to that.
Let me get out of your way.
So are you saying to go back and look at what we build? So we are right now looking at what transpired through those 3 months. And obviously the billing is, almost a month and a half to 2 months ahead of time. So the impact to our customers was tremendous. It really negatively impacted almost all 1,800 customers. We're going to go back as a team. We're going to look at what we can do to try to smooth that out and ensure that that never happens again. Now, whether that means rebates or credits or a future plan on how that calculation is done, we don't know yet, but we're going to come up with a solution and then communicate that back to the business community. But the impact was tremendous to our community, and we recognize that.
Still, is there any talk about using the reserves to actually cover, not to smooth it out, but actually to cover some of that ECA?
So the reserves are being utilized right now, and there's still a deficit in place. So even though we collected the money on the ECA, we still have a deficit that we're covering with reserves. So it would deplete reserves even more if we gave back a credit, but we need to look at the financials and how we're going to end up for the fiscal year. So we're still like 3 months away from closing the books on this year. And we got to figure out where we fall. But yes, we are going to go back and look and see what we can do to help customers out during that period of time. On top of that, we recognize that that can't happen again. The incremental increases that customers saw was it's not realistic for businesses to operate with that type of model. You can't operate a business thinking next month I'm going to get a bill that's going to be twice my electricity bill or 3 times, because it just inhibits your cash flow.
Carlos, is anybody looking into manipulating marketing?
So there was a couple of different things that happened in December. Okay. Southern California, we are tied at the city gate to take gas into the city. Okay. Southern California Gas Company, and we do have a slide on this. So Southern California Gas Company imports into the state of California almost 90% of their gas. There was also at that same time a line taken out or curtailment on one of the transmission lines, which even caused the spike in gas to go up even higher. We have never seen gas prices at that range. Normally, gas trades at City Gate between $6 to $7. Okay. And that given month and that given period of time, we saw increases anywhere from 15 to 30 to 50 to north of $50 at the City Gate. So we saw those prices. We have engaged in talks with Southern California Gas Company. There has been an investigation that's going on by the governor's office to try to understand what happened and mitigate the outcome of what happened in that case. We participated in the investigation, and we are going to be a focal point for the city. We're going to go back and we're going to go press our legislators and let them know that what happened cannot continue to happen. So it's my mission to go back to Sacramento, meet with the governor's office, meet with our state senator, meet with our assembly member, and let them know that these types of things not only impact our community, but impact everybody in the surrounding area negatively.
Oh, if I could just add to that, when this was happening, city staff had conversations with committee consultants that focus on energy issues at the state capitol and alerted them to what we were seeing, informed them how we were helping customers So this is something that we've been engaged in actively since it was all unfolding. And to Carlos's point, not only is the state investigating, so are the feds. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is also conducting an investigation of SoCal Gas and, the potential for market manipulation. So this, there are a lot of eyes on this that go way beyond what we can do, but we've been advocates from the beginning and continue to engage.
And it seems like it continues. Good line maintenance again, just recently. Oh, sorry.
No, I apologize. Can you do me a favor? Repeat that. We do have a handful of folks that are on
So-
remotely, and they're very interested to hear.
Sure. So, we're still seeing the manipulation, they've been doing further line work, and, now prices are just getting reasonable, but it seems very strange that you would do the construction work at this time of year. But yeah, we appreciate you looking into it.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, the city of Vernon, for our 30 years.
Why are you so calm now?
Where we are a citizen, so we should be happy to be here. So everything has up and down. I had a question or concern that one of my friends wanted to have a EV depot for trucks in the city of Vernon, and the point was they should get the electricity from green energy. Now, this brings up, since I started to EV, does it make sense, or does it create profit for the city that if the city rent the roof of the warehouses and give to those depot? There are a lot of trucking coming and going now and in the future. So they want to use the green energy, they want to use the solar energy. And if every warehouse wants to do it, cannot. It is very small. But all together, it is possible. And the city can use it and put it in the grid and then use it at one place.
Yeah, let me talk on a little bit about that. So distributed energy in the city and also our solar projects. So we as a utility are also going out and looking at solar projects outside the city, but basically bring that transmission in with the energy from solar, produced from solar projects. Distributed energy, which is solar, which you're talking about for businesses. So there's a cap on how much distributed energy that we have here in the city, which is about 5% of our load. One of the surveys that we did years ago, because we had the same idea, and we wanted to see where we could put a bunch of solar in the city of Vernon. One of the problems that we came up with at the time was with the construction of some of the buildings here in Vernon and the way they were constructed, it wasn't feasible to put solar panels up on the roof for firefighting efforts. So we got a lot of pushback from the fire department because they attack a lot of these fires from the roof of buildings, and having an energized source of electricity on these roofs was a problem. That was number one. But also the age of some of these buildings couldn't support. So some of these buildings were constructed in the early 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, and they couldn't support this infrastructure of a solar system now. Some of the newer buildings probably could. So we are looking at all that, and that's part of the IRP, looking at all the different resources that are available to us. And when we say we're going to put these EV chargers, they're going to go out, we're going to try to procure and look for green energy. I think we have to a mandate by the year 2030 of 50%, or is it 60%?
60% by
60%. So most of our resources are going to be renewable by a certain period of time by the year 2040. And that may include some rooftop solar, that may include some out of state projects, it makes in-state projects. So there's different things that the utilities are looking at to bring the lowest cost. But the ultimate goal is to provide the lowest cost to our customers so that we're not passing on high energy costs.
And I'm going to add to that as well. So like Carlos said, that's why it's so important that that flyer that went around with the QR code, you know, give your input, because what that means is beyond that legislative mandate in which we're meeting is to get to 60% by 2040, is how many of our businesses want to see more green? So whether that's us participating and going out and seeking these larger renewable projects, and then we build that into our overall costs, which might impact the overall rate. But also it's you've got your own corporate goals to make these sustainability objectives. I will also want to say from my personal perspective, coming into Vernon's been very different, right? So coming from other utilities that have a lot of solar, a lot of other renewables, you know, when you come into a city that is primarily businesses, what matters most, obviously, is rates, but most importantly is reliability. And I think what the state as a whole has really seen the challenges of what renewable has done to the state's reliability of the overall electric distribution grid has been challenging. And that's why we've seen more flex alerts, right? So the handful of businesses whose rooftop can handle solar, Anthony can attest to this, who's our customer service manager. What they've realized is that they haven't actually seen the cost savings that it's supposed to realize, to the reliability of what that means to their power quality and how that impacts their actual operation, whether it be distribution. Those are very, very critical things. When we talk about not impacting our customers with outage, you get a different power quality when your power is being served by solar than it does straight from the transmission and distribution system that the utility does. And so we as a utility don't discourage it. There is a cap to which we have, but the businesses themselves have found that is not a main source. There are a lot of EV charging depots that are coming, and part of their business model is a combination of both, right? They want to be able to bring in all these chargers that they can charge, but then they want to charge physically, charge the chargers using solar. That's not production from the utility side. We won't see revenue from that. So there are things that, and then ultimately now you've got 10 EV chargers that are being powered by solars that then doesn't impact our revenue, which will then ultimately impact your rate. So it's a balance that the utility has to take a look at. We are very thoughtful on our internal conversations about the types of businesses, the diversity of our business profile, to make sure that we are here to sustain the businesses that have been here for the 100 years, and not, be so wishful in a lot of the new technology and what the challenges they may pose. So it's a balance.
Any other questions? Thank you for taking the time today. The outlook, before you leave, just know that it is not doom and gloom. The outlook is positive. We gave you an estimate of conservative load that's going to be added to the city. We're not even going to add what we potentially could be getting over at the Smithfield site, which is the Farmer John site. We estimate that site will be leveled. It's about 30 acres and that'll all be developed. So we don't have any portfolio on that site yet, but we do know that there's more load coming. We do want to make sure that everybody here understands that our mission is to serve you. And I do want to sit down with every single one of you and talk about what our goals are, where we're going, so that everybody understands where the city's headed. And we're not just blindly running the ship. We're engaged, and we want to make sure that you're successful. And I think we have a question online.
Yes. Juliet, I think from Cal Plastics is online. Are you able to see what her question is? Okay. Great.
I did not type in my question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. Juliet Goff, Cal Plastics, representing the bottom 25 users. That was meant to be a joke, Carlos.
You're point 0.000001.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Equally valued as our top 25, I might add.
I want to first say, I want to thank everyone for all that information. There's a lot of new faces in City Hall. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person to meet you. Obviously, we've got really, really difficult headwinds going forward. I have two questions, I guess a statement and one question. My question is, the state of California is clearly trying to eliminate all natural gas. And when I heard that 90% is being imported, that just reinforces what's around the corner. For some of us, like I have 4 key pieces of equipment on natural gas. What's the future looking like? How is that transition going to be handled if they're going to take it away? That's one question. And then my statement is, some of us have been struggling and paying the price of all these challenges for many, many years. Some of us have moved away because they could. Some of us can't leave. And I'm one of those. I'm stuck. And I just want to say that these increases, even though you're talking about savings coming in 28 or 30, I don't know that I'm going to make it. So I just want to point out to those that are new on the city administration side, there are many of us who have been paying premiums for years to get to this 2028, 2030, rainbow. And some of us are never going to make it because they're going to already leave, or they're just going to close up. So I want to make that clear. In spite of all your efforts, that's what I see happening. But I would really like to hear, what are you doing? What should businesses be doing who are reliant on natural gas, knowing that it's gonna be taken away?
I don't necessarily know that natural gas will go away. I know that the state's trying to curtail water heaters and different appliances that use natural gas for different reasons, for greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. But I don't see natural gas going away. It's still going to be a commodity that'll be available to businesses in the future. I think sometimes you have knee-jerk reactions from the state, and they want to move it in a direction. Like I just heard the other day that getting rid of all diesel fired trucks by the year 2040 or 2045. We won't have any more diesel trucks available in California. I mean, I just don't know if some of these things are attainable. I don't know how that's going to be impacted, but I do know that natural gas will not go away. It'll still be a commodity that'll be available, and Vernon gas will not go away. The price, obviously, let's talk about why some of those things are driving the increase, and some of the things are out of our control. Is obviously one of them is the price of natural gas. And Juliet, that affects your bill directly, right? When you see the price of natural gas go up, your bill is affected exponentially. But you as a business owner made a decision to switch from electric motors to gas motors, right?
Yes, we did that back in 97.
So, and you realize a savings off of that. We have been very cognizant of how we run all the utilities, but I think the gas department in general has seen very little rate increases since its inception. Julia, the city's here for businesses like you that need help and that need to be able to be sustained, and we will do everything in our power to try to keep businesses in Vernon, and that's our mission. We don't want to drive business out. Some of the things are out of our control. Some of the things are within our control. But anything that we can do to help, we will step forward.
I know that, Carlos. It's just when you see the patterns of what's happening whether you're, a top 25 or a bottom 25, we're all dealing with the same problems. The cost of labor, the cost of power, the cost of occupancy, whether you own property or you rent, the regulations, the exposure, the liability exposure. It's not, the challenges, the arrows are not just coming from you guys. You're often the messenger. You guys actually are doing a great job in managing things. I'm always proud to tell people about how wonderful our city is today. But the climate in California in general is not business friendly. And so that's all. I'm just seeing, what's slowly beginning to happen. We've been talking about this for years, but I appreciate everything you said, and I'm going to keep fighting the good fight. I hope we don't lose any more of our top 25. I hope we get, new ones that come in soon, like the schedule looks like, and that, the next time we have this conversation, we have better news.
The other thing I want to say, Julia, is, and I know this is important to all businesses, is we want to give you a 5-year projection of what rate increases will look like. And I want to get input from the business community if that's something that's valuable to you, to know what your rate increases will be for the next 5 years. And I also want input from the businesses on how the ECA impacts each business, because clearly it's something that the utility has to take into an account and try to subsidize as much as possible when we have these bumps in the road.
Yeah, and I think you and I had a conversation about that early on when it first happened, and that, the utility users tax was taxing the surcharge, and that never should have happened. It should have been a straight pass through.
Yep, and that's something that we're going to look into.
Okay.
And Juliet, this is Todd. So just in terms of your first question, we've had preliminary talks with SoCalGas, and that's where we import our gas from, is SoCalGas through their transmission system. So SoCalGas told us that they have a plan by 2030 to blend green hydrogen into that natural gas mix, which will make it more sustainable. And that's what's so promising and exciting about potentially having a green hydrogen project here in the city, so we can get a firsthand look at that technology and see how we can transition some of that green sustainable hydrogen into our natural gas mix to keep your gas powered devices running well into. So just know that we're really trying to understand and get our hands on that technology and understand how that can help you in the future.
That's great news. Thank you.
Judith bring a question that I thought about, another question. And, you see the price increase of the electricity because of the price increase of whatever, natural gas or in general. But there is a hidden price increase here. And that is the warehouses that, the manufacturers get to a point that at today's environment, it is better they close their manufacturing and rent the warehouse, and they make a lot more money. And I think in the city of Vernon, if you look at it, you can find many of them that are thinking about shutting down the business, renting the warehouse, and not stop losing money and make a lot of money. So when it happens, the overhead of the power plant and electricity still exists. So it makes you to increase more and more the price of the electricity, and the more you increase it, the faster the manufacturers are going to shut the plant. So that is something that you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, duly noted.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I do want to say, as a city, we also want to give the opportunity for the WIA folks to say a few things. They're a partnership with our public health department, and they're trying to get a good sense, and this is for you, Juliet, and for all the smaller to medium-sized customers who are trying to put together a wellness program and medical needs for your employees. So Freddie, did you have a representative from WIA that you wanted to speak? Okay, do you want to come up?
All right, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm with Wellness Equity Alliance, and we've been working with the City of Vernon Health Department. And the goal is to tailor and improve public health services for both businesses, residents in Vernon, and then also your workers. As you know, the last pandemic was hard on everyone. So the city of Vernon has actually hired their own health officer, and he's with Wellness Equity Alliance, Dr. Tyler Evans. And so he is the authority. And if we encounter a next pandemic, or if you have public health questions, his goal is to allow businesses to stay open and to ensure that your workers are safe and that the businesses are safe. Rather than having to rely on Los Angeles County, now you have your own health officer who's going to be responsive to your needs. And when you take efforts in another pandemic to protect your workers, you're not going to be penalized for that, or you're not going to encounter bureaucracy. You know, at the desk at the front, we've started to take some surveys. And the purpose of these surveys is to, get an understanding of what businesses' needs are. And that could be anything from advice on personal protective equipment in an occupational setting, or it could be advice on what you think would make your workers healthier, such as diet and exercise or nutrition, you know, the basic core things of public health. And so we're surveying residents and workers, we're surveying businesses, but primarily this is going to be driven by business needs. And, you know, there's 50,000 workers who come into Vernon on any given day. And we'd like to see what kind of services we could start offering them so that they come into your work site healthy and they come into your work site satisfied. And really, that's all I have, other than I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Rosie Salazar, who's been doing outreach to the residents of Vernon. If you have any questions, I'll be here and I'm happy to answer those. So, okay, thank you very much.
Okay, and then before we wrap up, I do want to say for any of the customers who are trying to make sure they get a good sense of securing their overall gas, they can work with the Power Resource team and they can lock in a gas rate and enter into a long-term contract. So, all right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your time. Thank you.